Even death itself is afraid of Chuck Norris, is a classic joke that has now officially become a bitter curse. The man they called immortal. The man the entire world joked that death itself wouldn't dare come near. Chuck Norris is gone, at the age of 86. But while all of Hollywood is in shock, something even more unsettling lingers. Sylvester Stallone, the man who understood Chuck Norris better than almost anyone, has chosen to disappear. Not a single condolence, not a single tribute. Why could it be that he knows something the rest of the world doesn't? Or worse, did he hear something we will never get to hear? Then at the age of 79, Sylvester Stallone finally breaks his silence. But what he reveals is not simply a farewell. It is Chuck Norris's final words. Words never meant for the public, not for the press, not meant to be spread, but a truth. A truth so heavy that even Sylvester Stallone kept silent for a long time. The unbeatable legend. Before the world called him immortal, before the name Chuck Norris became a symbol beyond cinema, he was just Carlos Ray Norris, a boy no one believed would ever become anything. Born into a poor family in Oklahoma. In 1940, Chuck Norris's childhood bore no resemblance to a legend. His father struggled with alcoholism. His family fell apart and life was constantly unstable. No stability, no role model to follow. Only a shy, skinny boy who was constantly bullied. When Chuck was just 16, his parents divorced. He, his mother, and his two younger brothers moved to California, not to start a dream, but to survive. But sometimes legends don't begin with strength. They begin with endurance. The turning point came in 1958 when Chuck Norris joined the U.S. Air Force as a military policeman. He was stationed at Osan Air Base in South Korea, and it was here that everything began to change. Not with a major event, but with a very small decision. He walked into a martial arts class. At first, it was just a way to pass the time. But soon Chuck Norris was drawn into the world of Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art. He trained relentlessly. Not because of natural talent, but because he discovered something he had never felt before. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had control over something. After leaving the military in 1962, Chuck Norris opened martial arts schools in California. But he didn't just teach, he competed. And that was when the world began to take notice. From 1964 to 1974, Chuck Norris stepped into the professional karate arena where the strongest fighters of the time competed. He didn't win right away. In fact, he suffered consecutive losses to big names like Joe Louis and Alan Steen. But then, something changed. He refused to accept defeat ever again. The result: Chuck Norris won the World Professional Middleweight Karate Championship in 1968 and held that title for 6 consecutive years. During that time, no one could defeat him. His list of students was anything but ordinary. Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley. Hollywood stars came to learn martial arts from this very man. And it was Steve McQueen who said the one sentence that would change his life: "You should try acting." In 1972, Chuck Norris stepped into cinema with his role in Way of the Dragon, facing off directly against Bruce Lee. The scene at the Colosseum in Rome became one of the most iconic fight sequences in film history. No wires, no special effects, just 2 real men fighting for real. Bruce Lee was fast, fluid, nearly perfect. But Chuck Norris brought something different: weight, toughness, and a sense of real danger. Even though his character lost, the audience didn't forget him. They remembered Chuck Norris, and Hollywood did too. In the 1980s, he became a familiar face in action films. Missing in Action 1984 cast him as Colonel James Braddock, a soldier returning to Vietnam to rescue prisoners of war. Then came Walker, Texas Ranger, 1993 to 2001. This time, Chuck Norris was no longer a soldier, but a symbol of justice. Cordell Walker. His character didn't just defeat criminals. He represented a kind of man principled, strong, and uncompromising against evil. The show ran for 8 seasons, over 200 episodes. And Chuck Norris became a familiar face in millions of American households. But what truly made him immortal came from somewhere no one expected: the internet. In the early 2000s, a phenomenon emerged: Chuck Norris facts. Absurd statements, That spread like wildfire. Chuck Norris doesn't turn on the lights. He makes darkness retreat. Time doesn't pass for Chuck Norris. It waits for him. There is no evolution. Only species Chuck Norris allows to survive. It sounded like a joke, but millions shared it. And just like that, Chuck Norris was no longer just a man. He became a concept, a symbol beyond reality, a figure where logic no longer applied, a man who could not die. And that's why when news of his passing at 86 broke, it wasn't just news, it was a shock. Because for the first time, the world had to face a truth it never wanted to believe: Chuck Norris was only human. But perhaps, what unsettled people the most wasn't his death. It was this: if even Chuck Norris could be gone, then what in this world is truly unbeatable? The shocking passing. No longer a rumor, no longer anonymous posts drifting across social media. This time the world is forced to face a truth that for decades people believed would never happen. Chuck Norris is gone. On March 19, 2026, the world officially received the news no one wanted to believe: Chuck Norris, martial arts legend, action icon, had passed away at the age of 86. Unlike the false reports that had killed Chuck Norris many times on the internet before this time, the confirmation came from his own family. A brief statement was posted on Instagram: he passed peacefully surrounded by family. No cause disclosed, no detailed explanation. Just one cold fact: he was gone. According to media sources, he had been hospitalized in Hawaii following a medical emergency and passed away shortly afterward. What made the shock even stronger was the timing. Just days earlier, he had appeared healthy on social media, celebrating his 86th birthday, and saying a line that had become iconic: "I don't age. I level up." A man who had just said he doesn't age, suddenly gone only days later. The gap between those two moments left millions unable to process it. The news spread, and almost instantly the world reacted. Not just fans, not just Hollywood, but politicians, national leaders, and global artists. The President of the United States called him a tough and great man. The governor of Texas declared Texas has lost a legend. Many international figures described him as a global cultural icon. In Texas, the place forever tied to the image of Walker Texas Ranger fans began laying flowers, lighting candles, turning street corners into memorial sites. On the internet, millions of posts appeared within hours. Videos of his signature roundhouse kicks, his legendary fight with Bruce Lee. The lines, once treated as memes. But now, no one is laughing anymore. Because for the first time, people realized Chuck Norris was not immortal. Hollywood bows when even the strongest must say goodbye. Hollywood, the place he once ruled with the image of an unbeatable man, now falls silent. Then one by one, legend after legend begins to speak. Sylvester Stallone, who once stood alongside him in the Expendables 2, wrote he was the embodiment of a true American man. I will miss him. Arnold Schwarzenegger called him an icon both on screen and in real life. Names like Jean-Claude Van Damme, Dolph Lundgren also paid tribute. No more competition, no more spotlight. Just a simple truth: one of the toughest men in Hollywood is gone. And then, a question begins to emerge. Amid thousands of tributes, amid replayed footage, amid resurfacing memories, a question slowly takes shape. Who truly understood Chuck Norris? An undefeated fighter, an action star, an internet icon? Or the man behind all of it? Because in the final statement, his family didn't speak about fame. They didn't mention movies. They simply said he was a husband, a father, and the heart of the family. Perhaps that was the real man, a man the world never truly saw. And as the world tries to understand Chuck Norris one last time, there is one person who may have understood him in a very different way. A man who once stood beside him, fought alongside him, shared the same era. That man will tell the next part of the story, the relationship between Stallone and Norris. Unlike Hollywood's classic arch-rival pairings, the relationship between Sylvester Stallone and Chuck Norris didn't begin with conflict, but with something far rarer, a quiet recognition between two men who understood each other's worth. In the 70s and 80s, as action cinema exploded, both entered Hollywood from completely different paths. Stallone came from poverty, wrote Rocky out of desperation, and turned himself into a symbol of willpower. Norris came from real combat martial arts, defeating opponents in real life, then stepping into film as a real warrior. They didn't need to meet face to face to know of each other. Because in that world of cinema, if you were an icon, you knew the other icons. Unlike the loud rivalry between Stallone and Schwarzenegger, there was no public competition between them, only an unspoken understanding. That man is not like the rest. If Stallone was the man who fought to overcome fate, then Chuck Norris was the man fate didn't dare to challenge. Stallone created characters. Norris was the character. Rocky could be knocked down, then get back up. Rambo could be wounded, then strike back. But Chuck Norris, he was never in a position where he needed to rise again. That was the difference. And also the reason there was no rivalry between them. Because they weren't playing the same game. Stallone represented emotion, willpower, inner struggle. Norris represented control, discipline, and absolute strength. Those two archetypes didn't cancel each other out. They completed each other. Respect. Not in words, but in actions. Stallone didn't just respect Norris because he was a star. He respected him because he was that man in real life. In return, Norris never attacked, competed with, or tried to outshine Stallone, something extremely rare among action stars of that era. It wasn't until 2012 that audiences finally witnessed a moment that should have happened 20 years earlier. The Expendables 2. A film Stallone built as a living museum of action legends. And Chuck Norris was the final piece. But what's interesting is Norris didn't agree easily. He only accepted the role under one clear condition: no profanity in the film. A small detail that revealed a great deal. While Hollywood grew increasingly loose, Norris held firmly to his personal principles. And Stallone, he agreed, because he understood. If you want Chuck Norris to appear, you have to let him remain exactly who he is. In the film, Norris plays Booker, the lone wolf, a character almost identical to who he is in real life. His entrance is one of the most memorable moments in the entire series. Stallone's team is surrounded out of ammunition, overwhelmed by enemies. And then, no one knows from where enemies start dropping one by one. No dramatic music at first, no warning, just smoke, and a figure stepping out. Chuck Norris, no running, no rush, no need to prove anything. He simply walks out of the smoke, and the entire battlefield changes. That was no longer just a scene, it was a statement. When Chuck Norris shows up, the game is over. The peak moment wasn't the action, it was a line. In the film, his character says he was once bitten by a cobra, and the snake died. A Chuck Norris fact, a globally famous meme. But what matters isn't the joke. It's this: Stallone put that meme into the film as a tribute to Norris, and Norris agreed to say it. A legend, stepping into his own legend. The entire theater laughed, but it wasn't mockery, it was recognition. No one else could do this, except Chuck Norris. They weren't close friends in the sense of appearing together every day. Not rivals, not soulmates in the traditional sense. They were something far rarer. Men who witnessed the same era and understood each other's value without needing to say it. When Chuck Norris passed, Stallone didn't just lose a colleague, he lost a part of his past, a part of his standard, and a part of his own generation. And the final question: when men like Chuck Norris are gone, and men like Stallone grow older, who will replace them? Or perhaps, the world will never see an era like that again. The moment Stallone speaks. When Chuck Norris passed away, the world reacted exactly the way it does when a true icon falls. From politicians, writers, fighters, and actors, to the audiences who grew up with Walker Texas Ranger, almost everyone had something to say. Some shared memories, some called him a legend, others spoke of the discipline, faith, strength, and humility that Chuck Norris carried throughout his career. But amid that sea of voices, Sylvester Stallone's response created a very different feeling. Not because he was completely silent. The truth is, he did speak. People noted that Stallone paid tribute to Norris and called him all-American in every way. Reuters also placed Stallone among the top Hollywood action stars who publicly honored Norris. But what made people pause was this. He said very little, far less than expected, far too brief for someone from the same country, the same era, the same iconic status. And that is where the strange silence begins. Because for Stallone, Chuck Norris was not a distant name that could be acknowledged with a polite line and left behind. Norris was one of the figures who helped define an entire era of cinema alongside him. A time of men who didn't need to explain themselves too much, didn't need to analyze themselves on television, and didn't need social media to prove who they were. Norris came from real combat arenas to the screen carrying a presence forged through discipline and real-world experience. Stallone came from poverty and failure to become Rocky, and then Rambo symbols of endurance and willpower. These two men were different, yet they belonged to the same masculine aesthetic few words: resilience, standing tall in the face of adversity. The Guardian recalls Norris as a multiple-time undefeated karate champion before becoming the star of The Way of the Dragon Missing in Action and Walker, Texas Ranger. While Stallone has long been the central face of the legendary Rocky Rambo legacy. When someone like Norris passes for Stallone, it is not just the loss of a colleague, it is the loss of a part of the very world that created him. That is why Stallone's brief farewell carries a different weight. All-American in every way may sound simple, but read closely, it is not an ordinary sentence. It is a definition. In American usage, all-American does not simply mean very American. It evokes the image of a classic archetype: strong, self-reliant, disciplined, family-oriented, patriotic, unpretentious, unwilling to bend oneself to fit the times. Chuck Norris, in the eyes of many, was the embodiment of that ideal. Looking deeper, that restraint is also very Stallone. He belongs to a generation of men for whom emotions are not always expressed in words. There are people who the more they hurt, the less they write. The more they value something, the less they want to turn loss into a public display. When someone who clearly understands the value of Chuck Norris speaks in only a few words, the audience naturally wonders. Perhaps the most important part is what cannot be said. That question becomes even stronger when recalling the symbolic connection between the two in The Expendables 2. That film was almost a final coronation of the classic action era. Among a cast filled with muscle and history, Chuck Norris still entered as a legend within legends. People notes that The Expendables 2 was the last major project that placed Norris alongside Stallone, Van Damme, and Lundgren in the public memory. When someone once positioned as the legend, whose appearance makes the audience erupt, suddenly disappears, someone like Stallone likely understands better than anyone that this is not just the death of an individual. It is the sound of a door closing on an entire era. That's why calling it a strange silence is fair, but it needs to be understood more precisely. It is not the silence of someone who doesn't care, but the silence of someone who knows exactly what he has just lost. Stallone did speak, but not as much as the crowd expected. And sometimes that absence creates the greatest depth. A long post may move the public for a few minutes, but a few short words from someone of the same generation, the same stature, someone who understands the kind of classic masculinity Chuck Norris represented, leave behind a different echo, colder, deeper, and sadder. Perhaps the mystery isn't that Stallone is hiding something. Perhaps what truly lingers is another possibility. He isn't hiding anything at all. There are simply no words big enough to hold the name Chuck Norris anymore. And in a world of aging legends still standing, sometimes a few brief words are the most painful way to say goodbye. The final words of Chuck Norris. Some deaths close a life, but others open a message. And with Chuck Norris, what made millions pause wasn't just his passing, but the final words he left behind. Just days before his death, Chuck Norris appeared in a short video posted on social media. No illness, no sign of weakness, nothing that suggested an ending was near. He stood there upright with that familiar sharp gaze, his voice still clear and firm. An 86-year-old man, yet showing no trace of age. And then he said one line. Not a speech, not a grand message. Just a simple sentence: I don't age. I level up. At first, it sounded like a signature line, something unmistakably Chuck Norris. But when placed next to the reality that just days later he was gone, that line no longer feels ordinary. It becomes haunting. That sentence can be understood in many ways. But if you look deeper, it is not a denial of aging. It is a completely different way of seeing life. Not growing old, but leveling up. To Chuck Norris, time was not something that takes strength away. It was something that forges, sharpens, and elevates a person to another level. In that philosophy, death is no longer an end. It is a transition, a new level. That explains why throughout his career he never played a weak man. Not because the scripts didn't allow it, but because he never saw himself that way. He didn't fight to survive. He fought because it was his nature. And when a man lives his entire life with that mindset, death is not something to fear. It is simply part of the journey. Behind the unbeatable man was a deeply human life. Chuck Norris's personal life and relationships. When people talk about Chuck Norris, they often think of strength, discipline, legendary kicks, and the image of a man who cannot be defeated. But if you stop there, you've only seen half of who he is. Because behind the spotlight, behind the battles on screen, Chuck Norris had a personal life that was complex, full of changes, and deeply human. The first marriage. Young love and quiet cracks. Chuck Norris married his first wife, Diane Holchek, when he was still very young. It was a love that began in high school, simple and sincere, long before fame and the pressures of life arrived. They had 2 sons together, and for many years Norris was seen as a fairly traditional family man. But then, as his career began to rise, everything started to shift. Pressure, a demanding schedule, and the invisible distance between Chuck Norris the star and Chuck Norris the husband slowly appeared. After nearly 30 years together, they divorced in 1989. No loud scandal, no accusations, no sensational headlines, just an ending, in silence. But that silence says a lot. This wasn't a breakup driven by hatred. It was a relationship that could no longer be held together. There is a detail in Chuck Norris's life that many people don't know or don't pay attention to. In his younger years, he had an extramarital relationship and a daughter. What matters is not the fact itself, but how he faced it. Years later, Norris publicly acknowledged it and rebuilt his relationship with his daughter. No avoidance, no denial, no shifting blame, just taking responsibility. And that reveals a very different side of Chuck Norris, not a warrior, but a man willing to make things right. In 1998, Chuck Norris married Gina O'Kelly, a former model much younger than him. This was not a loud relationship, not the kind of Hollywood romance filled with drama. On the contrary, this was the relationship that brought the most stability to his life. They had twin children together. And from that point on, Norris gradually stepped away from the spotlight, spending more time with his family. A major turning point. When love becomes the real battle. If there is one moment that defines Chuck Norris as a man in real life, it is not found in his films. It is when his wife Gina suffered severe health complications after a medical procedure related to an MRI. Her condition became critical, and at that moment, Chuck Norris did something not every star would do. He stepped away from Hollywood, not temporarily, but almost completely, to be by her side, to care for her, to fight in a different way. No cameras, no script, no audience, just a man and his family. After that turning point, one thing became very clear. Chuck Norris did not define himself by fame. He defined himself by family, faith, responsibility. He once shared that every achievement in his career becomes meaningless if he cannot protect the people he loves. And that is why in the final years of his life, he almost disappeared from Hollywood. No scandals, no comeback, no attempt to hold on to the spotlight, because he chose something more important. The public sees Chuck Norris as a symbol, unbeatable, strong, unbreakable. But his personal life tells a different story. A man who made mistakes, who lost a marriage, who had to learn how to start over, and in the end, chose family over fame. Perhaps what truly made Chuck Norris a legend was not just the kicks on screen, but the way he lived his life off-screen. If you had the strength of Chuck Norris, would you use it to fight the world? or to protect the people you love. A legacy that cannot be erased. Some stars come and go. Some names shine brightly, then slowly fade into obscurity. But Chuck Norris does not belong to that group, because he was not just an actor, not just a martial artist. He was a multi-layered cultural icon existing simultaneously in martial arts cinema, and even the internet. Chuck Norris was a real fighter, not the kind of actor who learned martial arts, but someone who stepped into the ring and won. He was a professional karate champion for years, not once, not by luck, but through dominance. Yet what makes his legacy different is not just his achievements, it is his influence. Millions of people around the world began learning martial arts simply because they saw Chuck Norris. Not because they wanted to become actors, but because they wanted to become stronger, physically and mentally. Norris didn't teach people how to defeat opponents. He inspired them to defeat themselves. Discipline, control, perseverance. That is the true martial art he left behind. In today's era, action films often rely on special effects, advanced weapons, and complex cinematography. But in Chuck Norris's time, it was different. He only needed to step into the frame, and that was enough. He didn't need many words, no long monologues. One look, one kick, and the story was over. From The Way of the Dragon facing Bruce Lee to Missing in Action to Walker, Texas Ranger, Chuck Norris didn't just act in action films, he redefined them. A genre where justice is clear, right is clear, and the hero never falls. Today, that style may be seen as simple, but that simplicity is exactly where its strength lies, because it speaks to the most primal instinct in human nature: belief in justice. There is something very few stars ever achieve surviving across generations. Chuck Norris didn't just do that, he was reborn in the internet age. Chuck Norris facts, exaggerated jokes about his impossible strength became a global phenomenon. Chuck Norris doesn't sleep, he waits. Death once met Chuck Norris and asked for time off. At first, they were just memes, but gradually, they became part of culture. What's fascinating is that Chuck Norris didn't resist it. He embraced it. He even participated. In the Expendables 2, he delivered a Chuck Norris fact about himself, a legend, stepping into his own meme and making it immortal. The final message. The death of a legend always leaves a void, but with Chuck Norris, that void is not purely loss. It is a transition, a reminder that great individuals do not disappear. They simply change the way they exist. Sylvester Stallone did not say much, but that restraint carries the greatest weight, all-American in every way. A sentence that seems simple, but understood properly. It is a declaration. Chuck Norris was not just an actor, he was a standard, a model an entire generation looked up to. What remains is not regret, but gratitude. Gratitude that we lived in the same era as him. Gratitude that we were able to witness a man who was not only strong on screen but lived by those same values in real life. And perhaps the best way to speak about Chuck Norris is not to speak about his death, but to remember how he lived. Legends don't die, they become stories. And the story of Chuck Norris will continue to be told. What do you remember most about Chuck Norris? A movie, a quote, or the spirit he left behind? If you believe legends like him deserve to be remembered forever, hit like. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss stories that are just as deep, dramatic, and emotional like this one. Because there are stories that should never be forgotten, and we are the ones who keep them alive.
Some opinions expressed in this video may be subjective and reflect the content creator's perspective at the time of production. They should not be interpreted as objective facts or official positions. Legends never truly die, as long as we remember them. If you want to help us keep these stories alive, please subscribe to Silent Legends. What is your fondest memory of this icon? Share it in the comments below. I'd love to read your stories. Click this video right here on your screen. It's a journey you don't want to miss. Until next time.